This episode of the Lawn Care Business Success Podcast is brought to you by Audible. For a free 30-day trial and one free audiobook of your choice, head on over to lawncarebusinesssuccess.com/audible. You're listening to the Lawn Care Business Success Podcast, the weekly show sharing proven methods and systems in marketing, equipment, and customer service, educational and motivational, to help make your lawn care business an overwhelming success. Now here's your host, Julio Tomei. Welcome, Lawn Care Nation, to another episode of the Lawn Care Business Success Podcast. I'm your host, Julio Tomei, and this is episode number 124, entitled The Legend of the 36-Inch Walk Behind. Well, hello, everybody, and thanks again for joining me this week on another episode of the Lawn Care Business Success Podcast. I really appreciate you guys tuning in each and every week and downloading those episodes, and of course, for the questions and comments and feedback that you guys have been sending my way. And on that note, this week's episode is all sort of about those questions and comments that have been coming in. So as most of you guys know, over the course of the summer, I ended up picking up two 36-inch walk-behind mowers. So I started with the 36-inch Exmark Viking fixed deck mower that I found, and this was quite a bit of an older unit. Had a lot of miles on it, but it was still in really good shape. It was, cosmetically, the paint and stuff probably wasn't the greatest, obviously. But the overall condition of the mower, you could tell it was always maintained, and it still had a lot of life left in it. So I bought that to try out, and part of the reason I did that, as you guys know, it was to replace a stolen piece of equipment. So previous to that, I was using a 42-inch John Deere tractor in my business, and this sort of was a full circle type moment in my business with that tractor, because I started with a John Deere tractor and ended up, progressing through and getting different pieces of commercial ride-ons, including a walker and a Gravely zero turn, and then ending back up using a tractor again because of the just conditions that I have to work in, the amount of rain and how soft the ground is, and to just try to prevent rutting that was happening even when it wasn't raining, because of the clay base and all that stuff. I've talked about this numerous times. You guys are probably tired of hearing it, but so you guys sort of get the gist of it. So I was using that John Deere tractor. It worked fantastically for those conditions. It would very rarely rut. And if it did, on the one or two occasions that it did, it was so nothing bad. It would just leave, some indentations in the lawn in certain really soggy areas, but it would never tear up the lawn like the walker would when it would get stuck. So it was, just like sort of the perfect match. So, after that got stolen, the only downside for me in my business with that John Deere tractor was the fact that it was a 42-inch. And I know for most of you, probably 99% of you listening to this, you would consider a 42-inch mower small. But for me, it's huge. Because of the types of lawns that I service. So, I'm in the densely populated city. The average home size where I am, and this is because I'm in a suburb, so the property sizes are a bit bigger, but we're still talking about, on average, for an older home, about 7,000 square feet maximum. There are a few here and there that are, maybe 10,000. And then you can get into some more rural properties that are, a lot bigger. But for the average, when you're getting into sort of subdivisions and things like that. So if it's an older subdivision, about 7,000 square feet. But if you're getting into a newer subdivision, because of density and just trying, and the property prices, I think on average in those ones, you're looking at about 3,500 to 4,000 square feet for the property. Now that's not lawn, that's the whole property, including the house, a garage, if there's a driveway, sidewalks, patios, all that sort of stuff. So with those newer homes, there's very, very little lawns left. A lot of them, I refer to as shoebox homes. They'll have a small little front yard and the backyard. In most cases, with some of them on the really small ones, it's not even worth taking the mower, a 21-inch mower back there. I just will take a weed whacker and just trim it, because it's literally like a 3 foot by maybe 4 or 5 foot strip of grass, and that's it. But for the average homes in sort of the older neighborhoods, like I said, where there's like 7,000 square foot properties, you get some corner lots and things like that, some that might hit that 10,000, maybe a little bit more. The 21-inch mower, for the most case, will get the job done for 100% of my properties, of course, but it's just, is it the most efficient? And then on top of that, is it wearing you out? So ever since I got the tractor stolen, I've been hesitant on buying something else, partly because I don't leave equipment in my trailer anymore. So I unload every morning or unload every night after I'm finished my route for the day, and I load back up in the morning. I only take now what I need for the day, or before, I would just have the trailer completely loaded with everything I had, and I would just leave it all in there, for the most part, right? Other than things like aerators and power rakes and stuff like that were seasonal. But for the, your average, I would have, all the combi system attachments in there. I would have pole pruners, all sorts of stuff. Even though, some of those things like the, extension pole pruner, I may only use, a couple times a year. It was in the trailer all the time, just in case. So, I've gone away from that, like I say, and I only go through and use and load up what I need for each and every day, and then unload at the end of the day. So this sort of, at first was kind of, obviously it was a huge adjustment and a huge pain in the rear to have to do that. So it was one of the reasons why I decided, I'm going to see if I can just do my whole route with just the 21-inch mower from now on. I'm not going to replace the ride-on mower, because it's just, it's going to be too much of a pain to load and unload a machine each and every day out of the back as well. And part of it is just the noise. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac and stuff, so I just thought, it's going to be kind of a pain in the rear for my neighbors to, hear me. With a push mower, the 21-inch Honda, I don't need to turn it on. I can just, let my ramp down and push it up there, and then load up a blower and thing. It's relatively quiet. But with a larger machine, obviously I can't push it up the ramps. I would have to turn it on each morning and stuff. So just being sort of considerate of my neighbors, and not wanting to disturb them each morning. I thought, I'm going to see if I can, avoid getting a larger mower. I push, I say push mode, but I'm using the Honda HRC 216. So it's, hydrostatic, self-propelled. So it's a bit of both, right? You are pushing it in certain instances. You're pulling every time you reverse. When you're turning the machine, you have to pivot and turn it and stuff. But the, forward motion is self-propelled. So I was using that for 100% of my properties for 2 years until this summer. And like I say, it was working fine. It wasn't a question of whether the mower can do the job. Obviously, a 21-inch mower mows lawns. It'll mow grass. It can do any size property, really. But is it the most efficient? Of course not, right? Having a larger mower for a larger property is obviously more efficient. You could mow a football field with the 21-inch mower, but it's not advisable. It's going to take you a long, long time. So I decided after this past year, especially, I was really starting to feel worn down, physically, especially in my knees, from all of the walking, behind that mower. There was evenings or nights where I would go to bed and I wouldn't be able to sleep at night because of the pain and burning and stuff that was just in my leg muscles and in my knees from the amount of miles I was putting on each day walking. And then you consider the fact that you're doing this all in work boots versus, walking runners or shoes. It really is quite the task to think about the amount of miles that we can be active each and every day in this business. So I sort of made, the decision to, I think I'm going to, buy another tractor originally. I was like, maybe I'll buy it. My wife was always saying, why don't you just get another one? It's, you're in so much pain all the time and stuff. Obviously, some of those properties are just too big to be doing with that 21-inch mower. So I started looking at tractors again. But a couple of things turned me off with buying the tractors. Like I said, the John Deere, it was just a residential unit, because of the lightweight of those models. So with those, a lot of the focus at times being a residential unit is sort of the coolness factor for a homeowner who might be purchasing it. And so they have design decisions on those types of machines that aren't necessarily the best for efficiency, but more for just, some sort of fancy feature. So I'll give you an example. The original John Deere tractor I had, the very first one, they were the type that had the clear gas tank under the seat. So you would lift the seat up, there'd be the fill, hole there, the spout there with a cap. But you could look underneath the fender and it was just a clear container. And it was a smaller, I think it was like a 2-gallon or something, gas tank on that one. And then when it came time to purchase my second tractor, after I decided to sell the walker and all that stuff, one of the nice notable changes they made with that one was it was essentially the same design and same tractor, but one of the features was they put a bigger gas tank. I wouldn't say huge, but it's a bigger gas tank. It was like a 4-gallon or something. So it took up all the space between the hydrostatic transmission and the underside of the fender. There was no room for anything else, where that first tractor, there was quite a bit of space there left over. And with this one, it had sort of, when you're sitting on the seat and you look down between your legs area, there was just sort of a clear sight window, which was the gas tank, just sort of a cutout in the body that you could see the white, clear sort of fuel tank, and you could see the fuel sloshing around in there. And they had some markings for like, if it was empty to full. So you could just physically see how much fuel was in your tank just by looking at it, right? It doesn't take much. So what they changed now on the new ones that really turned me off was they went to sort of just to have a new gizmo or gadget or some, whiz bang feature for a homeowner, was they put a gas gauge on it. But they just did it in the same spot where that sight window was. So they actually have a little needle. So instead of being the clear fuel tank that you could see through, it's just a black gauge now that has sort of like a needle that has the markings like, empty to full. And this little needle floats up and down, to tell you where you are. So you don't actually see the fuel. You're looking at this needle, like you would in your car gas gauge. The difference, though, is that they had to go back to a small gas tank to be able to fit all of the contraptions and levers and things and the floats and all that stuff inside the tank to make this little gas gauge thing work. So again, not really, focused on efficiency, but more for just to have some, gadget there for a homeowner to think that that's cool, that it has a gas gauge there. Whereas, having a larger tank, it doesn't take much. It was a white clear tank that you could actually see the amount of gas that was in it sloshing around. Where now the gas tank is black. So you can't see how much fuel is in it, and you have to rely on that gas gauge thingy on the front. So, it's things like that that really turned me off, because I was like, I really like the large fuel tank. You fill it up, and I could get, a week or so of mowing with it and not have to worry about refilling the tank for a week. Where now, smaller tank, I'm going to have to fill it up halfway through the week. It just... and there's more parts and things to go wrong and to stop working. And it was just like, that saying, keep it simple, stupid, right? It was just like, you had a perfect setup of a clear, large fuel container there that you could easily see how much fuel is in it. Why change it to this new thing just to have a, thing? But it's, it's retail. It's geared to the homeowner, and, that sort of thing. And we've all seen examples of that. So that was one of the reasons why I didn't pull a trigger on a new tractor right away. The other that started to creep up over months was the fact that it was 42 inch. And for me, like I said, that's a huge mower. Like, I cannot get that on most of my properties. So I literally, like the walker before it, would have the tractor sitting on my trailer, 90% of the time, and only utilizing it maybe 10% of the time. So, that was another consideration, was that, what would really work for me would be a smaller mower, a smaller deck size, something in between the 42 and the 21 that I'm using. Now, I know these newer, larger push style mowers like the Exmark Commercial 30 and stuff are now available. And that was a consideration. I did look at those types of mowers. But then again, I was like, but then you're pushing it, which, and I understand that it's self-propelled. But what I mean by you're pushing it is that you're physically walking behind it, which, on those larger properties isn't going to help out my fatigue. Yes, I may not have to push it as much, because technically it should be, less stripes to lay, because it's a larger deck, but you're still walking behind it. So, I was not too keen on that. So that's why, I sort of went full circle and started thinking about all those times I had been on those forums online and watching those conversations. And the theme that popped up all the time was that, a lawn, and I know this is like a lot of this was US based, United States based lawns and stuff, where properties seem to be a lot larger. But the overall theme was that every lawn care company either starts out with a 36-inch walk behind, or should at least have a 36-inch walk behind available for certain jobs, because they are just the workhorse of, a lawn care company. And a lot of this has to do with their stability on hills, and the fact that they can get through most gates. Again, this is based on, US lawns, which, like I say, tend to be larger, and may have larger gates and stuff like that. But I started to think about that and start to think about the size, going, if I, instead of going with a John Deere, let me look at the weight ratings of these machines and see if I can, see how they compare. So what I found was that with that Exmark Viking, that it was right around the exact same weight as a standard John Deere tractor. So I think the John Deere tractor was actually 3 or 4 pounds heavier. And I'm talking about like a 100 series tractor than the standalone Exmark Viking. And the Viking is built like a tank, so I'm not sure. I would have assumed that it was still heavier than the tractor, because the tractor has, lighter duty frame, a lot more plastic parts and things like that. But I guess the whole sum of it, still equals in that 480 or 450 something pound range. So I was looking at it and surprised to see that they were within a few pounds. And then I thought, well, actually, this would actually be better, because with the tractor, that doesn't include my own weight. And the only way to use a tractor is by sitting on it. So the operator's weight is on top of that 450 or 480. I can't remember off the top of my head now. It was either in the 450 pound or 480 pound range. And the walk behind the Exmark Viking was literally about 3 or 4 pounds difference from that rating. So I was like, this is actually better, because I'm actually behind it. And this thing includes a sulky. So it seems a lot more versatile. I'd never ridden a sulky and stuff, but I was like, this is probably pretty versatile. If there's lawns or areas that I need to, I can still walk behind the machine like a traditional lawnmower, but then I can, a hill or something that I wouldn't be able to do, obviously, with a tractor, I could do with this, but then I can drop a sulky on the larger corner lot properties and ride it and save myself, all of that, extra fatigue from, constantly walking. So, that's initially why I decided to try it. And the other thing was that, hey, it's a 36 inch versus a 42. So there is a possibility that I could fit this mower on even more properties than the John Deere, and would be able to use this more than 10%. So it's not sitting on my trailer as often. So I started to try that out, but it was a dry summer when I purchased it. I believe I got it in July. And it was, at the sort of height of the drought season, and things were very, very dry. And I ended up getting some, it didn't have a bagger kit or anything with it. So I ended up getting just some mulch blades for it. And as most of you guys know, I made sort of a chute blocker for it, just so that I could mulch with it. Or, relatively mulch with it, just the dry grass. It wasn't a big deal. And it was doing a really good job as far as that. Actually, the cut, I was really impressed with the Exmark Viking, the cut. Especially with the new, I had some copper head mulching blades for it. And it worked really nice, and it left a really nice cut. It actually almost made it look sort of like green velvet when it was left behind. It was very, very, very nice cut in those conditions, at least. But being the, sort of person I am, I'm, constantly checking Craigslist and stuff. And lo and behold, almost a month to the day, I see another one pop up. And if any of you guys have followed the podcast or the story, you'll know that these types of mowers are not very popular here. So, when I saw that first one, regardless of how old it was, the price was right. And, I jumped on it, but it was more too because I had never seen one, to see one for sale is quite rare. So there's not like a huge selection. It's not like you're going on Craigslist and there's, 12 mowers to choose from at any one time. If you're looking for a 36 inch, type mower, there's lots of tractors. There's lots of 21 inch mowers, and, on the commercial side, you're more likely to find a zero turn than anything else. So, very rare to find a 36 inch walk behind type mower. But lo and behold, almost exactly a month to the day in August, just doing my regular Craigslist crawl, up pops a 36 inch turf tracer. So this thing caught my eye right away because after a month of using the Viking, and when I say a month of use, you have to take in consideration that, it's summer, it's dry. I'm only mowing lawns every 2 weeks. So I literally used it, for 2 weeks, and of that, maybe a couple of days, on each of those weeks, because I don't use it every day. But right away, some of the downsides of the Viking were the fixed deck. I have a lot of properties where I adjust the height in between each and every house. So, and sometimes from front yard to backyard will be a different height. Rare, but it has happened, where, it just looks better, at a certain height, maybe one notch down or something on my Honda versus, the front yard, to just give just a bit of a nicer cut in that particular area. And so the fixed deck right away started to become a bit of a pain, because it's like, you know what? Yes, you can change the height by removing those front caster wheels, and it's not a huge deal, but it's, greasy, and you got to tilt the machine back, and it's just a bit of a pain. It's not the best solution if that's what you require. And I remember that one of the reasons that the mower was so well maintained was that the company that owned it previous used it only on one townhouse complex. And they had a place on site where they were able to store it. So they never even trailered that walk behind around. They just would show up to their property and go to the shed or wherever the area was, maintenance building, where they were able to keep that machine to service that property that they had the contract for. So they would just leave their own machine at this property to service, and they maintained this property for years. So that's why partly it was well kept. It was only used on that one property, and it was not really trailered around very often. So, that was a consideration. And, looking back and thinking about it, I was like, okay, that makes total sense, because they were mowing on a weekly basis, this townhouse, and they never had to adjust the height. They had this one set height that they would mow this place at, and that's it. So they didn't have to deal with the thing. So that was sort of a downer right away. The other downside to that mower was it had a Kohler Command Pro engine, an older one. Like I said, the machine had a lot of miles on it. And it was a recoil start, 15 horsepower, but it was just hard to start. It took a lot of pulling power to get that thing to turn over. And in most cases, there's sort of a chain at the bottom that you can release the hydrostatic transmissions from the motor to make it easier. And this was a must with that mower. You had to do that first thing in the morning to get that thing started. So it just seemed like, when I first got that on my trailer and stuff, and started using it, after the first and second day, I had initially the thought of, okay, what did I get myself into? This thing's a pain to get started. And then I had one day where I went to my first house, and, you also have to have the speed lever down in neutral, and, a bunch of other things all set. And I guess while trailering it, the speed lever maybe moved a little bit and was out of the neutral position. And I was trying to start it, and I couldn't get it started because obviously it wasn't in the neutral position, so it's not going to start. But it ended up flooding the machine. And once I realized, after trying to pull this cord, and I was just working at it, and I couldn't get this thing started, and then I realized that it wasn't in the position. It was flooded, and I couldn't get it to start. And like I said, it just took so much energy and effort to try to pull this cord on this older, single cylinder engine, that, it just was, I was like, oh man, I'm going to have to really think about how the process of getting this thing started and all that sort of stuff. So when that next one had popped up, the turf tracer, one of the things that attracted me right away, obviously, was it was a newer machine. It was a 1997. A 2000. Sorry, the 1997 was the Viking. The turf tracer was a 2009. So it was quite a huge difference there in how much newer this machine was. The other thing was it was a Kawasaki engine. It was a twin cylinder. So I was like, I got to go check this thing out. So I'm emailing the guy back and forth, and we set up an appointment. I go to look at it, and I noticed right away how easy it is for him to start it. Like, it looked like very little effort when he was pulling the cord. So I started just probing and asking him some questions about it. And I asked him about that chain at the bottom that you got to release that hydrostatic transmission. And the guy honestly didn't even know what that was for. He had never used it. He had never had the need to release transmission. And he just said, he says, well, that's what that's for. He says, I obviously saw that was there. He says, I didn't really ever look into what it was for. I said, and I explained, that it releases a thing and it makes it easier to start. And he says, well, I've never needed it. Even on a cold morning, you just pull the cord. It's very easy to pull. And, so I gave it a shot myself. And yes, it was completely different. It was very easy to pull. I would have still rathered an electric start. And after using it now for a month or so, 2 months, I still would prefer an electric start over recoil. But it was much easier than the other one. So I decided we negotiated on a price. I decided to take a chance on it. And, I've been using that turf tracer ever since. And in fact, I don't think I've even started the Viking ever since I bought the turf tracer. It's just been sitting in the garage now. I emptied the fuel out of it, and that's about it. And I was, sort of waiting to see what I was going to do with it. I think, I'm probably going to put it for sale and just get rid of it. I was thinking originally I'll keep it as a backup. Because I paid relatively little for it. I can just have it sitting there, and in case the turf tracer ever gives me any issues, I can use that Viking. But then I started thinking too that I still do really want to get and try one of these stand-on mowers if I can find, a used one for sale on Craigslist. And when I first started looking, sort of playing with the idea of looking for mowers, I saw 2 of them pop up. Which was rare, but every time I would, I wasn't looking at them, seriously, in the sense that it wasn't a day-to-day thing that I was checking Craigslist to see if something would pop up. So it was just sort of an occasional, I would look at Craigslist and there would be one, and then I would email the person about it and it was like long sold, and they just never removed the ad. And then a few months later, another one had popped up. And it was the same thing. I wasn't checking Craigslist on a regular basis. So by the time I checked it, the ad had already been up for a few weeks, and the mower had been sold already. So I just started to think, okay, well, there was 2 that popped up. So, if I keep my eyes open on a regular basis, another one of these like Toro 36-inch grandstands might pop up. And I still would like to try that. The only problem is I have no more space to put another mower. So that's why I was thinking, I'll probably just end up selling the Viking, because then that'll free up space there. Now, obviously, if I still have the Viking and something pops up, I can make something work. I could even take one of the mowers to a family member's house and store it there until I sell one of the mowers or something. I can free up space that way if something comes up. But ideally, obviously, it'd be just easier to be able to get rid of the Viking. That'll free up that space that if something does come along, then I can just buy it and not have to worry about storage and all that sort of things. Because I don't want to leave the mower on the trailer. and have, these thieves popping around, because it seems to be quite the issue happening lately. The neighborhood seems to be going through some problems with thieves on a nightly basis, just checking cars and things. They're not breaking into cars, so to speak, but they're just checking car handles to see if people have inadvertently forgotten to lock their doors, and then they're opportunistic, right? And then they'll just open their doors and go through your stuff and just steal whatever they can. But in the course of that, they're also poking around and looking at what else you have. And I think that's maybe how, they may have discovered, my trailer in the driveway and saw that the equipment was on it and stuff, and maybe then planned to come back to, steal that first time. So, I wanted to prevent something like that from happening again, and that's why I unload the equipment. I just don't want to give them anything to sort of any temptations, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. So if they don't see anything, then there's less temptation for them to try anything. So I'm just going to break for the podcast announcements, and after that we'll get into how it's been for the 2 months of using the 36-inch mowers, and what I found with them, and if they live up to the legend of the 36-inch walk behind. All right, so stay tuned. Hey guys, if you have any questions or comments about the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can head on over to lawncarebusinesssuccess.com/contact. And while you're there, why not join my mailing list and get access to a free PDF document of a landscape maintenance contract you can feel free to copy and use in your own business. For you Instagram users out there, be sure to follow me at Lawn Care Business Success. And if you haven't checked out my videos yet, well, what are you waiting for? Be sure to subscribe to the Lawn Care Business Success YouTube channel. Now, I know you guys love listening to audio while you work as much as I do, so I've partnered up with Audible to offer you guys a free 30-day trial and 1 free audiobook of your choice. There's no long-term commitments, and you can cancel anytime. And get this, even if you cancel during the trial period, you get to keep your free audiobook. It's a great way to try the service and see if Audible is right for you. So why not give it a try? Head on over to lawncarebusinesssuccess.com/audible. Now back to the show. Okay, so before the break there, I was talking about sort of the lead up to how I got the machines, how I got into using the 36-inch mowers. So I want to get into now the questions about, like I say, I've had people commenting, questioning on some of the videos I've put up on me using those machines, people asking me, sort of following along with the podcast and asking, how have I felt? How have I felt with 36-inch mowers? What do I like about them? What I don't like about them? And, do they live up to that sort of legend of a 36-inch mower? Can I use them on more and more properties? And the answer is I love them. Not necessarily, I can't say them, because obviously not necessarily the Viking. I don't really use the Viking. But the Turf Tracer, I love it so far. It's been a great mower. It has taken, there's quite a bit of a learning curve to it. Not only in the operation, and even 2 months in, I'm still, I'm a lot more comfortable with the machine, but it's still, there's still times where I'm, finding some awkwardness using it. But overall, it has been fantastic. I have been able to use it on more properties than I expected. I've actually changed my whole route around. Originally thinking, in the summertime, when things were dry and stuff, I was like, I'll just, because I'm, doing certain lawns at certain times, I'll just group all of the, larger lawns together on one day so that I don't have to load and unload the Turf Tracer every day. I can just do it one day a week. And this was only going to be a temporary thing during the summer. But I've ended up keeping it that way. I've gotten so used to doing the route that way. And, none of my clients have questioned why the day was different or anything like that. So I just started doing it that way and continued. And that has actually worked out even better as well, because it is actually more efficient now for me to do all of those lawns that I can use the turf tracer on all on one day. And then the rest of the week, I just use the Honda, and I'm not having to load and unload the machine just to do, maybe one lawn a day or 2 lawns a day or 3 lawns or something, and then the rest with the Honda. I'm doing a full day every lawn with the turf tracer on the day that I'm using it. So at least that's how it's working out right now. As the future goes, and seeing how I'm able to squeeze this in, properties with certain gates and stuff. And as I pick up new clients, I may need to then have a day and a half of sort of turf tracer use, maybe this coming spring as I pick up new clients and stuff. But we'll see how that goes, as the time goes on. But I would say that, yes, a 36-inch mower lives up to the legend. And I can completely understand why, it is a recommended mower for lawn care companies starting out, at least. And that's the sort of the theme that I've seen on online forums and stuff, is that when people are asking for advice and should I get this zero turn, should I get that zero turn, blah, 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 a lot of people will chime in and say, get yourself a good commercial walk behind. Or if somebody's looking to add a zero turn that maybe is a residential model, the advice always seems to be, get yourself a good used commercial walk behind. You'll probably end up spending less and have a much better mower than buying a new residential zero turn. It'll last you longer and blah, blah, blah. It's very versatile. And I would say that I would probably agree with that. The 36-inch walk behind, it's, like I said, built like a tank. And it's been really nice. Granted, being a turf tracer, with the floating deck. For me, at least, that's the only way to go. I'm not, a big fan of that fixed deck style, because I do change the heights of my cutting, property to property. So the turf tracer is also about 100 pounds heavier than the fixed deck model Viking. So that's a bit of a consideration too, but it's still, in line with me using a tractor and sitting on it. So it still works for me in my business. It's smaller. I have been able to get it through gates, not all gates. But, I've surprised myself on certain properties and being able to get it in, whether there's, like, for example, there's one that the gate is probably about 37 inches or so. So it's a tight squeeze. And they've, the gate post, is right up against the house in this particular property, but they have like this little border around the foundation of the house that's maybe a foot of, with some stones, and then gravel. So there's like a stone border, like a concrete stone type lawn edging type border, and then it's got gravel between the house and this border, and I guess it's just to keep the lawn away from the house originally. So, but what they did is they continued that around the entire house, so it actually is in the middle of the gate as well. So that one was it's one of the ones where I can still get the mower in there, but I got to sort of jump that stone border and ride up on the gravel on an angle to get through the gate, because obviously the gate is only 37 inches wide, and then you have this sort of stone border thing taking up about a foot of it. So I can still get it in, but I got to sort of jump that and ride on an angle over the gravel and stuff. If this was like a flower bed or something, obviously, then I wouldn't be able to do that because I'd be crushing the flowers and stuff that was in there. So think of that. Think of it like a flower bed going around the house, but it's gravel, and so I got to sort of ride up on that and get it through. But I'm able to get it through and get that house done. There's another one that has enough room through the gate, but then the sidewalk that leads from that gate in the front all the way around the house to the backyard. There's a couple of, they keep their garbage cans and stuff along that side of the house, and they're the large sort of city bins. So I have to wheel those out of the way first to be able to get the mower down the sidewalk. So not a big deal, but little adjustments like that. And now with the bagger kit, as most of you guys know, I've been using that Encore bagger kit. It fits flawlessly. It works great. And on, I would say every house except for one, I can keep the metal bagger kit backing plate on the mower and get through the gates no problem. But on that one particular one, that one that I'm talking about with that gravel that I got to sort of jump, to get to the backyard, I have to take the bagger back plate off. Now, luckily, it's not a big deal. It's one little cotter pin that pops out, and then the bagger plate comes off. So it's not a huge deal. It's not like when I was using the John Deere on some properties where I could just get that 42-inch if I had the bagger kit on it and it had that big side tube and the bags on the back, but the bags are kind of offset to one side. There was properties where I had to take the whole bagger kit off the whole side tube. I'd have to take the bags off, then I'd have to take the whole back bracket off and all that, and then get to the backyard and put it all back together, mow the backyard, then take it all off again to get through the front yard, then put it all back on again. So it was a bit of a pain when I was into the bagging part. Where this is not such a big deal. It's only, like I say, one house so far that the mower won't go back through the gate with that backing plate on, but because it's just one cotter pin, and that backing plate just pops off, it's super simple. So it's not a huge deal, and works great. So far, the Turf Tracer, it came with the dedicated mulching kit, like the factory one with the baffles and all that. And that's all the previous owner had ever used it on. It was on there since new, and they had never taken it off. So I removed that a couple weeks ago after, sort of the lawns returned with the wet weather, growing really long and stuff. And the mulching kit was then having a hard time with a combination of all the leaves falling and the grass growing steady and being wet. It was taking multiple passes each house to just get rid of all the leaves and grass and stuff, and it was very inefficient. So I decided, I'm going to switch to the bagging kit. So I switched to that bagger kit that I purchased, and it works great. I can pick up all the leaves and cut the grass in one pass per stripe instead of having to multiple cut it. And that's even with wet leaves and stuff. And I credit this to it being the bagger kit on these being attached right to the side of the deck. So it's a space hog. It's a lot wider of a machine now. It's like I'm using a 60-inch machine or something when you consider the fact that the bag is sitting on the side of the deck. But because there's no tube or anything for the leaves and stuff to go through, it just goes right into the bag. There's no clogs to deal with. Even the Walker mower that I had with the GHS system, with a 10-inch propeller fan stuff built in, when it was wet grass, it could still have issues if you weren't careful with clogging. Because the grass is just wet and sticky, and it would start to build up in the tube. But with this, there's no issues because there's no tube to go up. It's straight out of the discharge deck from the things right into the bag. So it so far has been really quite impressive through different conditions. So yeah, I have been really impressed with the mower. I would now, knowing that 36-inch size, that I can get that into backyards and stuff is really sort of why I would like to, go for a standard type mower next. Sort of, if I see a used one, I don't think I would still justify the cost of buying a brand new one. I think the last time I checked here, a Toro Grandstand 36, which is what, there's not too many to choose from here. So the Toro is one I know that the dealer has carried. I've seen it, but it's $11,000. So I'm like, for the amount of lawns that I do still with that, I'm not comfortable spending 11 grand on that, because it's just going to take way too long to recoup that money for the lawn. So I'm currently doing probably between, I would say, 8 to 10 maximum lawns that I can use that 36-inch mower on. So for me, spending 11 grand for that is not, it's just not worth it. But finding a used one, then it justifies that more. My other plan going forward is, if I do find a grandstand, would be, I would still probably keep the turf tracer as well, because the grandstand is going to be quite a bit heavier. And I may only be able to use it during certain times of the year. So I would like to have both machines, and keep them versatile in what they do. So I'd like both of them to be able to be set up for bagging, mulching, that sort of thing. And then be able to switch depending on maybe the weather conditions that day, or the times of year, when it's, during the wet season, when ground is a lot softer and stuff like that, then I could be using the turf tracer, because it's a lot lighter and I'm not directly putting my operator weight on it. But then as things get a little bit more dry, then being able to switch to, say, the grandstand, and enjoying the extra efficiency with that. So a word on the efficiency. So I really do enjoy using the turf tracer. It's fairly easy to use once you get the hang of it. I actually enjoy the turf tracer day more than I do the Honda days now, and I actually start grumbling that I hate push mowing, because even though the 21-inch mower is self-propelled, and it's doing the work going forward, you still have to pivot, and when you're turning and all that, and pull it backwards when you're having to reverse areas and all that stuff. So I started noticing right away, feeling it in my shoulders and stuff after a day of using the turf tracer, where the turf tracer, even if you're doing a lawn where you can't use the sulky and you have to still walk behind it, which I have a few lawns where I do that. I'll use the turf tracer, but not actually use the sulky. I'll just walk behind it. It's still so much easier to use because it's doing all the work. When you reverse, it reverses. With the levers, you're not having to pull the machine backwards. Even turning, it's all hydrostatic. So it all, it turns, you pull a lever and it turns. So you're basically just following behind and guiding the machine. And as far as the momentum to go forward or backwards or turning, it's doing all the machine. So for me, at least, I find it easier to use than using the 21-inch mower. And then the fact that it's cutting, a 36-inch swath versus a 21, you're getting the lawns done quicker and just less fatigue. So, I was able to fit all of my larger properties on one day, and I can get them all done by myself in that one day between 9 in the morning and say 2:30, and I have them all done, and it's less fatigue than the days using the Honda. And some of those days, you might have less lawns or comparable, but it just seems like you're less tired using the larger walk behind mower. Obviously, probably not a surprise for most of you guys listening to this, but for me, it was quite surprising. So anyways, like I say, because of using it and seeing sort of the potential for it, seeing that, actually a 36-inch mower, it's not 100% the ideal size, because like I say here, it's sort of that issue with the gates. And yes, I can get that 36-inch mower through a lot of gates, but there's still, a lot of lawns that if it was just a bit smaller, maybe 34 inches, that I would be able to get that through, 100% of the gates and be able to use it on all of my properties, sort of idea, right? So, but like I say, the machines are so rare here that, the 36 inches, when you see one pop up, it's usually always a 36. 36 inch seems to be the most popular size across the board for those machines. So, when one does pop up, it is a 36 inch. So, it's been really surprising to me how much I've enjoyed using it. Even though there are things about it, I don't like. The biggest thing notably is just sort of the, just the way it sort of works. Like the whole, you have to pick a gear to put it in, and then, once you release those operator handles and stuff, then it starts going forward, and you have to actually squeeze to slow down, and you're constantly having to squeeze the handles and stuff. Whereas, on a zero turn, you let go of the handles, it sits there idling, and you push forward to go forward, you pull back to go backwards. It just seems way more intuitive and less dangerous. This thing, it's always going, and especially in the beginning, the more you start to use it, the less, panic there is, I would say. But that learning curve in the beginning can be pretty frightful, when it's sort of, going where it wants to go at times, and you're still learning the controls, and you can forget that, to let go of the handles, to stop it, to release those operator presence controls in an emergency and have the thing stop. You're more likely to be trying to squeeze the handles to slow it down and all that sort of stuff, and be panicking until you get used to the controls. So that's the only thing with that, is that it's a bit awkward to use in the beginning. It takes quite a bit of a learning curve. For me, it seemed forever, but it was because of it being summertime, and when I first got it. So I'm not using it very often. It was like, I'd use it one day, because I'd have all my lawns that I could use that machine on all lined up on one day. I would use it, and then it was essentially like 2 weeks later when I would get to use it again. So it was a very long process for the learning, and I was doing a lot of practicing on my own, cutting my own lawn every few days, just trying to get more time on the machine. And that did help, but like I say, it was still a bit of a learning curve, and that's why I'm still, it's only been sort of a month of constant cutting now, where I'm using it every week, one day a week, every week. So I'm getting better and better at the machine, but still could still use a lot more practice. But we're coming up to the end of the season here, so I might have to wait till the springtime when I get to really put it through its paces. But so far, so good. I really do enjoy it, but I look forward to sort of finding a grandstand or standard type mower as well. And trying those out and seeing what those are all about, and if the weight ratio for those will work with my business. The ones that I have looked up, I think the grandstand was quite a bit heavier, I think in the 800-pound range. So that's quite a big jump in weight. So we'll have to see how that goes. But like I say, if I find one that's, a used one on Craigslist for a right price, then it may be worth exploring. So that's basically how I have made it with the 36-inch walk-behind mower, my impressions, sort of my experiences with it going on. I would absolutely understand now why they are so popular and why they are probably the most recommended type of mower for a lawn care business startup. Very versatile, like I say, on hills and stuff, and being able to use a sulky or walk behind it, getting into most tight areas, getting through gates. Just a very good, very efficient mower design. And I think even after a month or so, it's, a mower that I would recommend for anybody starting out would be to look for a commercial 36-inch walk-behind mower as a great all-round mower. That you can get a lot of stuff done, and you can probably find them relatively cheap. I know the two that I have were very, inconsiderate, all things considered, and just great all-round mowers. I would absolutely try to find a floating deck type model. Would be my only recommendation. That Turf Tracer seems to be fantastic. I don't have any, as far as the controls of other models, whether any other models are better equipped or easier to use. I only have the experience of using the Exmark with the ECS controls, and then the Viking with the pistol grip type controls. A word on the controls. I have been using both. Everybody sort of said the ECS's controls are better. I suppose they are, in the sense that your hands are tucked in more, so they're not out to the sides. So there's less chance, when you're turning corners and stuff, if you're, along a fence line and you go to turn, that your knuckles aren't going to get hit or scraped up against things. But the amount of effort squeezing the levers and stuff is about the same. Maybe a little bit easier with the ECS controls, but not much. I wouldn't say it's much. I'm a short guy, so comfortability wise, the pistol grip positioning, they're lower than the ECS controls, and I found that more comfortable in the beginning. I've now gotten used to the ECS controls being up high and my elbows being sort of bent up high, where with the pistol grips, my arms were just stretched out down, straight down, and that seemed more comfortable in the beginning. But like I say, that was sort of just in the beginning, going back and forth between the two. Now, after using the Turf Tracer for the 2 months or so, the ECS controls are, not an issue anymore. They work fine. So that's it for this week. Here's to wishing you guys all overwhelming success and freedom in your lawn care business. Bye for now.